All right, I'll kick it off if everyone's happy. Now, Grant, when I do hand it over to you, you'll have to keep an eye on the logins. Only the host can admit. I discovered that yesterday when I handed over.
So I have to be the host to share? Can't you just allow me to share without making me host?
Yeah, I don't know about that, but anyway, we'll give that a go. Anyway, people are still flooding in, which is great. Anyway, welcome. This is kind of our inaugural water catch up. We've done a couple fleet for which a couple of people here, like Lockie, who's fantastically persistent with us, is turning up. It's very much trying to be very much a user group, user forum. Obviously, there's a slight bent towards our technology and what we're doing, but it's also, we try and intermix it with discussions on business processes and what people are doing within the industry, and also just to sort of share ideas and what have you, and just sort of float things past quickly while we've got a reasonable base of people sitting in the one room. So it really is, the aim is really to be a water professionals network to share knowledge. That's kind of less it is about our technology and our business, the kind of the better. It'll obviously relate back, and so it influences what we're doing and the sort of R&D we're putting in. So we've obviously got an interest in what's going on. We very much are looking for people. It's not to be driven 100% by us. Obviously, we try and host it and put it all together and what have you. But as much as we can, we like people to basically create sessions, and we've had sessions. Andrew Rails, who's sitting somewhere on my screen there. He did a presentation to the fleet group last week. And of course, anyone here can join the fleet, join the other, and we're just trying to run these sessions. At the end of this sort of session, we'll have a little vote on how often you want it. We originally scheduled the fleet one to be once a quarter, and we were voted down to being once a month. So at the moment, it was deemed to be successful. So look, we'll kind of kick it out. Let me just run through a few things. If people haven't seen, we've got on the website, which a lot of you have seen, the Bundaberg case study, which is worth having a look in the water industry. This really covers the project that the guys up at Bundy did last year, which was over sort of middle of 2020. Then what we'll do is I've got Grant presenting. He's presenting on reducing customer impact during water and sewer network maintenance through notifications and automation. So I'll get him to take control for that. A little bit of news. We've got a range of new fleet customers. Gardenia, Boganshire, Brimbank. We've also kicked off interesting project in the Philippines. That's actually covering all of their construction equipment across the whole nation. So it's about 11,000 fleet assets. They've got about 40,000 staff in the division, and they do all the roads. And they've got some really interesting assets, complex assets, which they're really taking on, which is going to be interesting in terms of they do things like keep the waterways open with their dredges. So they're actually looking at putting AVL devices in to monitor engines and positioning and all sorts of things in terms of that asset management, including the sort of complexity of how do you maintain a large dredge. So that's quite an exciting project for us. The other sort of thing that our marketing guys, which is Paul up there somewhere, we've sort of rebranding a little bit on the water side. So we're going to change from the name Focus, which is really kind of our older technology, to using the word Clarity. So Formbird Clarity, which is really, because it's a totally different technology base and everything else, we thought it probably does make sense for us to head towards a different name. It's purely marketing, but it's going to be called Formbird Clarity. I'll just.
Couldn't you get a smaller word? That's too hard to spell.
Only for you, James. I'm sorry.
Yeah, cheers,
anyway,
mate.
I'm going to show you it now, because otherwise I'll be shot by Ian and Paul if I don't show it. So so from the marketing department, it's something like that anyway. Stick to our logo with a bit of a water drop. The original design had a cupped hands with a little droplet in it, and I thought it looked incredibly religious, so we changed from that one. Anyway, that's kind of, if you see the word clarity, it really is kind of our water focused product, and we're just sort of changing its name to reflect, I suppose, A, the new technology, and B, that we're, not that focus is dead as a name, but we've kind of moved on. So why don't I throw it over to Grant? I will sort of at the end of the session, very much look for feedback from people in terms of what you'd like to see. Sean, who unfortunately hasn't been able to make it, and Sean's from Bundy and was, if you like, the project lead up there. In his guilt of not attending today, has volunteered to present probably at the next one. So I was able to round that up from him. Not quite sure the topic yet, but it could be any number of topics, probably around the project itself and project management and the implementation of the technology and what they did is probably what he'd like to talk about. But it could be any number of topics. I'm hoping that Lockie at some point will get a few words to say. I know that Lockie's never short of a word, but we'll get him in there.
Well, Mark.
He's got endless amount of topics, being a very passionate person in that space, and Ming, who's probably our oldest user actually and designer and implementer of Formbird. I'd really, I'd like Ming to chip in at some point as well, if you feel up to it. So let me anyway throw it over to Grant. I won't waste your time anymore. And like I said, just also please feel free to put up your hand, interrupt, whatever. The more people can get out of it, the better. Yeah. So let me just throw it over to Grant. So Grant, just in case, I don't know whether I can just let you share. Let me see.
It looked green. Oh no.
I think I have to make you host.
Yeah, okay. It says host disabled sharing.
Yeah, I'm making you host, yeah. There you go.
Okay. All right, ready to go?
Yeah, off you go.
Okay, so I think there's probably quite a few participants here who haven't met me before. So I'm Grant Randall, and I've been working at Formbird. Sorry, I'm just admitting a few people since 2017, I think. But in my life before that, I was an automotive engineer working at Holden, had a long career there. So my background is not IT, which is probably worth bearing in mind as you go through this, as we go through this presentation, looking at the application that that I've been able to work with Greater Western Water and build without having had a deep background in technology. So I'll kick it off there. Just see if anyone's coming in. No, okay. All right. So and by the way, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to jump in along the way. We'll try and keep it as informal as possible. Yeah, so basically since 2017, I've worked at Greater Western Water on site, building the works management application for them. And that went live in 2017, actually, I think it must have started in 2016, launched in 2017. Anyway, so at that time, we asked ourselves, do we put customers first when carrying out network maintenance? And do our field crew know about any risks that are associated with the works, and how can we do better? So when we went live with our first iteration, there were some things that still we could improve on. How could we do better? So if we looked at a case back once when we went live, we had just one panel on the screen that would convey critical information to the crew or to anyone who was looking at a case. And the information about, critical information like that was not reflected in the action at all. But but in reality, the field crew only actually looks at the action. So, you know, there was opportunity for critical stuff to be missed. And also, we were entirely dependent on our call takers, you know, manually entering that data in the critical information panel. So we're relying on these eyeballs. Things like hot shut-off blocks, key customers, dialysis patients, were only found by reviewing spreadsheets on SharePoint or switching over to another screen and looking at the GIS around the location where the issue's been reported on the call. And whilst all that's going on, of course, we've got this customer sitting here saying, what's going on? So there's clearly a way, you know, there's clearly an opportunity to improve what's going on there. And, you know, otherwise, the field crew also would only become aware of things like dialysis sites if they didn't notice on the case that there was a dialysis site involved with this case. They'd only pick it up on the valve markings on the street when they actually got to the job. And sometimes, you know, if there was a key customer in the area, such as a brewery, pretty important, that would depend on knowledge of the area. So you could probably say that our app really was focused on the assets at that time and not so much on the customers. And there was a reason for that. We just didn't have the property data in the initial implementation, and we didn't really have any customers attributes recorded at property locations. We just didn't have that data in the system. So just give us a sec here. So we set about trying to improve that. So wouldn't it be so much better if we could see warnings about critical information like that as we were taking the call? And here's an example of what we might like to see. Put in our address. This site has a dialysis patient in its vicinity, and so any works that we do might be impacted. So we're giving a warning directly to the call taker and showing on the map here that you know, that there's a potential impact to a dialysis patient. Just got another address here. Select another address.
That's good.
And there you go. We also have in this vicinity, a very important customer, Carlton and United Breweries. So we can see as soon as we open it up that if we do any works in this area, we might be impacting a key customer. So in order to get this this kind of functionality into the system, we needed to get the property data in. Whoops. What's happened to my, okay. So here's an example of a property that we've been able to bring into the system. So we created a template, and then we've created an integration to bring in the property data from the GIS system. Okay. And then we needed to be able to register our key customers. And so we created a document template to be able to bring in key customers. Here's an example showing the geometry of the key customer site and showing it in a shut-off block, which I'll talk about in a second. And here's an example of a dialysis patient, and here's the location of the dialysis patient. So we've been able to create a record for these kind of critical customers. Okay, so the next thing we need to know is, could work on our assets impact any of those customers? Oh. Okay, so what we had to do then was build shut-off blocks. Now, this shut-off blocks are a concept that I'm hoping that most of the people on the call are familiar with, but essentially a collection of assets, and when you turn off a series of valves, it's going to shut off the supply to those assets and also, of course, to the downstream properties. So that information is in the GIS system, the Enlighten GIS system that Greater Western Water has. And so, we could get that information brought into our Formbird Clarity. So what you can see here in this picture is this is on the map showing all the assets, the pipes, all the services and the properties. And this is also showing a secondary shut-off block here, which is a downstream court bowl that would be impacted if we shut off supply to this primary shut-off block. And here you can see links to each of the individual properties and assets that make up that block, and also a link to the secondary shut-off block, the downstream shut-off block. And here's the actual, an outline of the geometry of the whole block. Okay, so once we've done that.
Hey, Grant, it's James here. Just a question.
Yeah.
Do you send notifications to those customers in the shut-off block if there's, say, something going to impact them?
Yes, we do.
Excellent.
Yeah. So I wasn't necessarily planning to talk about that project today because it was a subsequent project to this one.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But for sure, now that we have that property information, of course, it gives us, all kinds of opportunities like that. And we now pass that property information out to an external service that Greater Western Water have built, and then that integrates it with customer information from their Gentrack billing system, and then sends an SMS out. So
that's good, because I actually had that happen to me yesterday.
Oh, right.
Low pressure water. So
yeah.
I sent in a request to council about the low pressure water. Got a call back, and someone was working from 10 o'clock in the area.
Right.
But obviously we don't get notifications, so we don't know. So they could have potentially had 3 or 4 people like me notifying them. So you're going to get rid of all that work by sending the SMSs from your call center.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's an interesting philosophical discussion there too, that you'll notify lots of customers, which is a good thing from the customer's point of view. Whether it actually reduces your load on your call center may or may not eventuate, because you actually end up making more people aware of things going on, and that may prompt them to call you. So,
okay.
so part of that project actually was to also publish outage information on a map on the website, and then through the SMS direct the customers to that website to get more information, to try and, I mean, obviously that's a great approach for the customer as well, but also may have a positive impact on the OCC or the call center.
That's good. Good work, Grant.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah. So there's been quite a lot going on.
Yes. Yeah. As soon as I saw that, that triggered my mind. I went, "Oh, the next step is," and you're already there. Perfect.
Yeah.
And to be honest there, James, sorry, this is Lockie from Greater Western. That was one of the 2 major drivers of this project, where one major driver was letting our call takers and our field workers know at the time of the call the potential impact of any works in this area. But also it then does lead on to allowing our customers to know what's happening in the area, but also our customer managers. So in the example that Grant showed where we were impacting CUB, we're in a position now where not only can we let everyone in the area know that there may be works affecting their water supply, we can also directly trigger an SMS from Formbird to our key customer manager saying, just letting you know we've got something going on in CUB. We haven't had to turn their water off yet, but you may want to get on the phone to them and say, hey, there may be works in the area, just a heads up.
Yep.
So
Yep, no.
there's a whole lot of other things that can be driven from this, and this has been one of the biggest pieces that we had to implement, but it's also the biggest value that we can get out of this one.
Yeah, I can see the value, Lockie. This is great.
Okay.
Grant, Macro
yeah.
from Barn Water.
Yeah.
Do you use that for unplanned and planned works?
The shut-off block, you mean? Or
well, no, the notifications to customers.
So yeah, so far in the first implementation, it's just unplanned.
Okay.
I'm just considering that. So we built an engine that basically, because it's using an external SMS system for the notification out to the public. So we've actually ended up implementing 2 notification systems. There's one that's driven out internally from Formbird, and that's being used for notifying internal people, or is about to be used for notifying people internally. But for the external customers, because there needed to be an interaction with the Gentrack system to get the phone numbers, that actually goes out to an external service that does the SMS notifications. And we had to build an engine within Formbird that sends out event data to that external service. And it's actually quite a flexible engine that we built. So it can actually notify for planned and unplanned, but for the initially, the business took the decision to only notify unplanned at this stage, until they sort of monitor how it goes. And then there may be the opportunity down the track to simply configure some new rules that will also send notifications for planned works.
Yep, that's
Shaz Green here from Western Port Water. So electricity distribution organisations have been using that sort of SMS notifications for about 8 years, and they normally send only for unplanned, one when the outage becomes known, one when they have an updated restoration time for customers, and then one at the end of the job to say, this is restored. If you're still experiencing problems, let us know because it's unrelated to the outage we've got. When I worked at City Power Powercall, we found that telling customers about or reminding customers about planned works just caused a big influx of calls into the contact centre, because if people had missed it, they would then start calling, for lots of different reasons. So mostly they stuck with unplanned for that reason.
Shaz,
Right.
that was exactly why the decision was made by the business. It wasn't a technical implication. It was the let's see what the
Customer
response
behaviour.
is. Yeah. So it would be much easier to do for the planned works, because obviously when it's going to happen, you can let people know, and we definitely intend to utilize that. But we're still under we're still working through the data at the moment and seeing what the response to the messaging is. But like Grant alluded to earlier, it's one of those, if people don't know about it, that they're being impacted, they don't necessarily need to know about it. But
Exactly
as soon as
right.
we start telling people, then all of a sudden they might want to know a bit more information. So it is a balance, but that's definitely why the decision was made.
We also had a couple of people go to the Ombudsman and say, they're legislated to tell us with 10 days notice, and now they just told us on the morning with an SMS, because that was their perception. It didn't matter what the reality was. Their perception was, I just got told with this SMS. So
Yep, and there are a lot of legal back and forth involved in those ones, and again, that's why we haven't pushed this to planned at this stage. But
we're so lucky. Our work is so easy, guys, isn't it? Hey.
Awesome.
And then would you have the option, because not everyone has a mobile phone connected to their bill, I think we've found there's gaps in that data as well. So with plan, you would have to then supplement with paper notifications to those customers as well. So
so our methodology going forward is that we'll still be doing the hand letter drops,
okay.
but they would be supplemented by SMSing.
Yep.
The SMS implications as well is, do you have the correct details on hand? What happens when someone rings up saying, I got this message, I don't live at that address, or if we don't have the current contact details. So again, technically easy, but logistically a bit more difficult.
Yeah, sure. Cheers, thanks for that.
No worries.
Go out and find a bridge that's full of termites.
think someone's talking about termites. Maybe put yourself on mute. I think I can do that. There we go. All right. Yes. So, so essentially, once we had all the properties, key sites, dialysis patients, shut-off blocks, once we have all that data in the system, we can then build some business rules to utilize that stuff. So essentially, we built business rules that match the coordinates from our address entry with the property data, and then that automates the identification of a shut-off block here, and then that can also automate. Once we've done that, we can query that shut-off block, and we can identify any key customers or any dialysis patients that are associated with that shut-off block. So, going from that data, it's just some pretty straightforward queries. Maybe Peter wouldn't agree with me, but to find the property, shut-off block, and the key customers. And then I don't know how much everyone's into the very techie side of things, but in our selected asset, we're then able to use handlebar statements and configure the layers in our selected asset to show things like the selected shutoff key site display, the selected shutoff blocks, and the various and the selected properties. So once we have all that, once we essentially had the property document, the shutoff block document, and the related key customers and dialysis patients, we can just simply do it through configuration, which is something I can do as an application developer, is configure the map to show those entities. It's not something that required, the skills of a rule set developer to do that. Okay, so it's probably worth pointing out at this stage that this project took quite a while to get implemented, and the reason for that was that it was quite dependent on the data, and getting the data from the GIS into the system, and then also have an integration so that it automatically would upload new data as maintenance is done in the GIS was quite a challenge. And for better or worse, Greater Western Water chose to extend the existing interface that they have with the GIS that's built in Oracle Fusionware. It's not really an ideal integration product, and it's something that Greater Western Water will be looking to move away from. But at the time, that was the product that we had to use, and it didn't have the capacity to manage querying for all the assets and properties and key sites that we already had in our system, and make all the respective updates and build the relationships in when it was doing the maintenance. Fortunately, the server-side rule functionality on Formbird enabled us to take care of that task. So they were able to send in, through the integration, a minimal amount of information, and we were able to build rule sets that could post-process that data and build all the relationships to build the shutoff blocks that give us the functionality we need. Probably a more capable integration system would have been able to do that itself, but fortunately, our the flexibility of our rule sets enabled us to take care of that job and still get the job done. We then found out after doing all that in fact, the shutoff block data hadn't been really well utilized in the GIS, mainly because it hadn't been able to be presented to the crews and people in the field. And over the years, it had got a little bit, let's say, messy. And so it took several months of hard work and quite a few updates from OpenSpatial in Enlighten to actually get the shutoff blocks up to a state where we could start utilizing them in the field. So that was kind of a discovery that we made partway through the project. It meant that our implementation took a little bit longer than we'd planned on. Okay, so next. Okay, yeah, so now I'm just, sorry, just getting myself back on track here. Okay. So now, once we've had all this data in the system, what else could we do? So I've got a property here, and it'd be great to know, in whether this customer has had their service interrupted previously. So looking at this table here, you can see that this particular property has had an unplanned interruption 3 times. We can see its outage history. So how are we getting this history in there? So when we create an unplanned isolation, we select an asset. This water pipe has been selected, and that automatically then determines all the properties that have been affected by that impact. Okay, and then what we can do then is, after this isolation is completed, we can do a bit of a review. We can determine whether, in fact, all those properties really were impacted. We know that there are some deficiencies in the data, such as service connections that are actually misplaced. Someone can do a bit of a review and determine actually this particular property doesn't belong in this shut-off block and it can be removed. And then when we're done, we can finalize the impact, and then we can essentially signal to the downstream systems that this impact is now ready to be used in a calculation for GSLs. That downstream system yet hasn't been integrated at Greater Western Water, but there's a project in the pipeline to be able to take this data directly and then use it for GSL calculations. All right. So you can also see when you look at this impact that we have this shut-off block here that's marked as pink, and that's indicating that we have a hot shut-off block. So that's defined as having had 3 or more interruptions in the past 12 months. And we've automated that system now. So we've automated it such that when we have an impact, we automatically determine that there have been more than the 3 shutoffs, and we can identify on the property document that it's now a hot shutoff block. So it populates this date here saying hot shutoff since a certain date. Okay, so how does that then play out? Well, when we do a new case and we enter in the address. Oh.
Sorry, Graham, while you're doing that, I'll just explain. Yeah. We consider a shut-off block hot when it's at risk of triggering an ESC KPI. So essentially what that is saying is we haven't yet triggered this ESC KPI, but if we were to shut it off one more time, then we would be at risk of having to pay out an agreement. So essentially what this does is highlight to the crew that if there's any possibility that this work can be done under pressure rather than taking down the main, or we can do it under temp supply, then that will enable us to not trigger that KPI. So that's what we consider a hot shut-off block.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation. I guess sometimes you just assume everyone knows the terminology that's used at Greater Western. Yeah, so here, entering the address for this hot shut-off block property. And we can see now that automatically populated the critical information here. And then if I go and look at the action that's attached to that case, or a case at that kind of address, we get this we get this warning at the banner. So when the crew opens up this case to go and have a look at it, they're immediately notified that there's an impact and they might need to take some additional or different action. Okay. All right. Now, some of you might remember this poor fellow from the opening slide. So it turned out that Greater Western Water have records for kind of interactions like this, where a dog has harassed a meter reader or other things have taken place at a property. Only problem is that information is stored in Gentrack, which is not something that's readily accessible to the crew that are actually going out there. So the question was, could we extend our system of warnings to prevent this scenario? And that's a project we've been working on in the last couple of weeks or months with Greater Western Water. So first of all, we would need a new record type. So we created a new record type, an aggressive interaction record, and we're able to record various kinds of details. This is my address. It's not me though. And we can now record an address where something has taken place that a field crew's reported or a meter reader's reported. And we can also select some properties in the vicinity to indicate a warning zone. So if we were to go and do works at the neighbour's property or across the road, the crew can be aware that in that area, there's someone to be aware of. This is so when we create the case, we've implemented a pop-up warning. So when anyone opens this particular case, they'll see a pop-up warning, and they're asked to acknowledge that they've understood that there's a risk to take care of. Sorry, I sort of rushed through that, but in fact, we have two kinds of warnings. The first one was indicating that the risk was at this particular property, and then the one that you're about to see now is going to give a different wording, saying that this property is nearby to a potential risk. So just a different pop-up warning for the different properties that are in that location. All right, and then we also wanted the ability to be able to report an interaction. So oops. I think I've got the wrong screen here. We have a where is it? Now I can't find it.
You need to be in an action, Grant.
I need to be in an action, don't I? Ah, there we go. You can tell who's just been doing the testing on this. So from an action, if a field crew finds that they've had an interaction with someone, or maybe a dangerous dog or something else, they can create a new record directly inside the action. Maybe it's a location. Maybe there's people hanging around in a park typically that cause a problem, present a physical threat. We can indicate that maybe we require the police to attend because it's been a very particularly bad interaction. We can record a record number for the police, and we can also set some properties within, let's say, 100-metre radius, so that everyone knows. And should be able to save that. Okay, so we've now created a new aggressive interaction record. So if I now go and open the case, it takes a second. We get a on this case, we now get a warning, and there's a banner shown on the case. You can see a record here, and any of the actions that we go to will also show the banner.
And I think that's the really important one on this. With our concept of case and actions, you may have one case with 3 or 4 concurrent actions happening at the same time. If one of those actions were to trigger this, then it would be pushed back to the case and then streamed back down to all the actions. So if one person doing the investigate while another person is doing the water off, as soon as they indicate that there's an aggressive interaction, that will push through in real time. And the next time you look at your screen on the same case or in that area, even if you're not on the same case, you'll see that come up on your screen. I think it is worth following on, Grant, that just for that one as well, once you've identified, so we've reported an aggressive interaction, it then needs to be verified. Oh, yeah. So we don't want to simply say, you know, this guy looked at me sideways, so I'm reporting it. It does need to be, it can be confirmed or it can be rejected. And we do allow for, you know, the risk is no longer present. So if there was an aggressive dog that, you know, would bite you whenever you went in, if they've moved, then you could keep that record that there was an aggressive dog, but the risk is no longer present. So we want to encourage our field crews to report any aggressive interactions, but it will be at a work supervisor level that it'll be confirmed, because obviously we take this seriously and there will be other issues that we need to address or we need to allow for, such as freedom of information requests. So if someone reports, and pardon the language, says, oh, this guy's a dickhead, maybe as part of the confirmation, you could say the customer was aggressive in his language, that kind of thing, so that when someone does say, hey, why am I being treated differently, or I've heard that we've got a strike against our name, that it is actually being recorded, and we will need to provide that information. So it is something to take into consideration.
Yeah, and this is the panel here where those where those steps can be taken. So yeah, so I guess to sum it up there, you can see that once we got the property and customer attributes in there, we now kind of have an abundance of opportunities to manage things like customer impacts and take steps to improve crew safety and manage risks. So and to that point, only just this week, Lockie and I have been discussing, and we've been discussing using a similar register to this for abnormal voltage measurements that are picked up by crews in the field, so that we can also implement a warning there. So yeah, so hopefully that was informative to everyone, and I'll open up to any questions.
James here, I got a question on your messaging. Sorry about that, but
yeah, sure.
That's what we're. So when you've got SMSs going out to customers, that's okay if they're an owner. Now, if they're a renter, they're not going to get anything. Is there a plan to do Facebook posts on, say, a water site as such? Because everyone's on their phone on Facebook. And also they're not going to check their mailbox like they used to as well for letter drops.
It's definitely a possibility. On the first one, where we do keep records of owners and tenants,
I don't think we do.
Yeah, so, but even then, tenants can change and not update details.
Yep.
So that definitely is one of the issues, but we can send separate messages for owners and tenants. Our comms team do update on major issues directly to Facebook, but to launch that directly from Formbird, while it'd be easy, what currently happens is that we have triggers saying if there's a priority 1 event, then our comms team are made aware and they do that manually. So there's no reason you couldn't push, but we've made the decision at this stage that it's make the comms team aware and then they push out to the socials from there.
Yeah, okay. So you've just got rules around that. Because I thought it'd be great if you've got a local area and there's a local group. I don't know, it depends how people set up Facebook, of course.
It's definitely a consideration because it definitely goes the other way as well. Whenever someone's having trouble with us in the area or there's a perceived issue, they're very quick to jump on, community groups on Facebook, and then that's the first you hear of it.
Yep.
And while it's not related to this, we have considered there is social media listening capability that we've looked into in the past that may be able to trawl for those type of things. So if you see water come up on a Facebook post or certain language, then it might actually bring it to someone's attention so you can get ahead of it that way. Again, not related to the comms out, but getting ahead of things so that you can either get a message out there rather than letting it bubble in the social media environment. But it's definitely a fast moving area.
I know. Yeah, it's hard getting the messages out to everyone, especially when you just have the localized shutdowns.
I think it is worth mentioning, Grant, that as part of the outage mapping and the customer notification, we did intend to create a messaging page so that you could essentially draw a radius in an area that would then select the properties and then push a message from there. So it is quite easy to incorporate that capability once you have the initial setup, that you can essentially do a marquee select of either a suburb or, a 50-kilometre radius or wherever you want to go to, and that would then do the same call saying, well, these properties have these owners, and then push from there.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, similar, to Lockie's point there. I think you may recall when I created that aggressive interaction record, I was able to enter a radius and select the properties around that radius. So similarly, we can automate that property selection and then use that to schedule an event, whether it's sending it to an SMS system or sending out a Facebook post. So, that's all entirely within the capability of Formbird.
I think if there is anyone out in this group that is in the incident management teams as well, it's a pretty useful tool if you do need to get, boil water notices out as well. Ideally, it'd be great if we could get to a position where, you can send everyone in the vicinity a message, whether they're a customer or not. But I think you might have to have a chat to Delp about that one. But realistically, if you've got a festival in the area and there's 20,000 people at a campsite, not many of them are going to be your customers. So that is also something worth considering in the future, that you could, if you had those lists or that capability, you could incorporate that into the messaging.
Certainly, a lot of the emergency services apps have got the ability to, in a true emergency, triangulate that and do a broadcast message, don't they, for bushfires and that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So it's definitely worth. We've had a few with the recent storms about 6 months ago. We had a few boil water notices in our neighbouring area in Yarra Valley Water, and it definitely raised the question of whether we were able to do that. And again, we can easily push to our own customers because we have those details, but the integration with the emergency services is not something that we're seeming to get much traction on.
We face that a lot down on Phillip Island, being such a high tourist area and having so many Airbnbs and stuff. We would be, even if we knew tenants, we wouldn't know holiday people that were there on the day. Can I jump in, guys, and just ask a question around data cleansing and the pre-data work that you did? What portion of effort for the project do you think went into that?
80%.
Yeah.
That's the
Serane's
biggest
laughing.
weapon.
I'm surprised Serane hasn't asked this already, because this is what we talk about every day, Serane, isn't it?
I unmuted my mic and I was going to jump in with the same question. First of all, Serane Gunasakra of Western Port Water, and thanks, Grant and Lockie, for a great presentation. I just wanted to know how much of those features that you showed, like the service history, the shut-up logs and the pop-up warnings, how much of that was out-the-box standard features, and how much of that was actually in-house development? The reason I'm asking is we don't have development capability internally, so just want to get a gauge on, you know, what's off the shelf and what's how much effort is required to customize and do those sort of things.
It's probably a good question for you, Mark, but essentially our focus journey was we saw what Barwon Water had, and we essentially took what they had and ran with it. And it'd be a similar story for Bundaberg, where they came down and saw what we had and they took what we had and ran with it. Everything's uniquely customizable, but again, the component side of things, and again, Mark, you're probably better to talking to this, but if we can do it, then there's no reason you guys can't do it. So that would be in your due diligence period where you're saying, well, what do these guys do? Can we have that and build around that?
And,
and maybe, Sarana, just to take you back to my introduction of myself, I built that application, and to be honest, it is customized. You know, all those features that you saw were customized. But my background's not a developer. You know, I'm an automotive engineer, and I undertook a small amount of training, like I'm talking a couple of days training, and then learnt and built the whole application that you see on the job.
Oh, that's promising. Did you take note on that one, Shaz? And I was also, the other question I suppose Mark was, so all these development that the clients or individual customers do, that gets rolled into the product and gets shared around with
it. Yeah,
network.
And that's and it's kind of our policy about the ownership of IP. We basically have that all our contracts are a joint ownership of IP, and really, and none of our customers have ever complained about sharing it around, because it really, one reflects another. And really, that's the whole architecture of kind of the platform is, I always sort of describe it as a bit of a Lego system. So you get your Lego model, which has got all the different components, and then you will rearrange it, particularly when it comes to the applications like this is very integrated into your kind of construct. One of the issues we've had with and this is where Formbird came out of the focus concept, is that, when you're integrating with so many back-end systems and the business has such a different process. You look between all of our customers in the water industry, they're so different because, you've got different back-end systems, and we really become the front end of so many of those systems. You have very different processes and very different, even just assets. What City West Water has and what Barwon has are two different things. One's dealing with country, a lot more country. You've got treatment plants and what have you. City West Water are buying from Melbourne Water and City West Water, Greater Western Water. Sorry, I've still got the old name. Greater Western Water are dealing with inner city stuff. So and all those processes that have grown up over many, many years need to be reflected in the system. Customers can't just go and suddenly change their process to meet our system. All of our customers, and as Lockie did, very much took what Barwon as a starting point, and so did Bundaberg. That we all, and really just took it as a sort of Lego system. They could have turned it on that day. That would have been the off the shelf. There's nothing stopping anyone from logging in and just going from day one. But the fact of the matter is that there's different back-end systems, different GIS, different customer systems, different financial systems, different whatever, and also, like I said, different processes. Lockie, they manage all of their confined space entry and a whole lot of other processes. Others have emphasis more on the job safety on site and what have you. So essentially, with any of this sort of stuff, it just becomes rather than a individual component, it becomes a module of functionality. So, for instance, some of the R&D that's going on at the moment, that's actually getting implemented, a combination of a project with Greater Western, but also our R&D is, for instance, integrated into vehicle tracking and being able to present the vehicles on all the maps and what have you. That means that the dispatchers and the call takers have all the vehicles integrated and vehicle data, and that'll be potentially having, the driver ID and everything else. So, continuing to integrate. And that again becomes a little module that you decide how you want it seen within your application. But I suppose the heavy lifting's done. It becomes that little thing that someone can turn on and say, well, this is our business process. If you looked at that business process that Lockie described there, yeah, sure, you could probably take it all, but you'd probably look at it and say 30% of it really doesn't apply, or we can't use it, or whatever. But we do like that concept. And that's what, as I say, that's the fundamentals.
And, like I sort of mentioned, I did most of this application development. There is some, of course, there's some rule set development that's involved, but to give you, I've been tracking this over several years now, and to give you a bit of an idea, for every, person day of my effort to develop this entire application, there's probably about 30% of a, JavaScript developer, as in Peter Dexter, involved in getting all that functionality to work. The back end business rules and automation. So that's about the balance. Now, if you have a developer within your business, you could potentially do some of that work yourself. And Greater Western Water are developing more of that capability themselves in house. I think we've had other models too, haven't we, Mark? Where in my case, I'm a consultant from Formbird working at Greater Western Water, but in other cases, like I think maybe more typically at Barwon, they've got their own people that are doing that kind of application development, and then just outsourcing some of the rule set development to us. So there's different opportunities for how you might approach a project.
Yeah.
And I think, Sarani, the one last thing as well is the application that we have is the application that we designed. So there's a lot of history around how we got to where we were, but a lot of the applications that we were looking at prior were very rigid, and essentially you needed to change your workflow to match the system, whereas we built the system around our workflow. So we had some very, strict practices that we had, especially around CSE and those kind of things. We also went through a new way of working in the field, and rather than just sending job to job to job, we were spreading it out now. So it really did evolve into the application that we wanted rather than a best fit. So if there are specific tasks that you undertake, or, like we have a supervisor review process because that's what we required as part of our contract, you may not want that because it may be too cumbersome. So it is really flexible in that point, whereas off the shelf, you may have to work around what's in there.
Okay, everyone.
Thanks, Lockie.
Is there any other specific questions? I will just sort of throw it out there as well in terms of how did today work? I see that a few people have dropped off, which is absolutely fine. They'll pick up on the video. But for those that are now kind of left, was that interesting, useful? Regularity, once a quarter, once a month? We're happy to mix it up. Just a little bit of feedback, and we're more than happy to put the effort in and keep them going as much as people want and the content people want. Ming, you turned your light on.
Overall, it's pretty good, Mark. I'm interested to know more about the reporting side of Formbird. I understand that there's a huge improvement since we last looking into it. So yeah, I haven't kept myself up to date with that area. I have seen bits and pieces of presentation from here and there. Yeah, it would be good if we can run a session just talk about what we currently have and how we turn this data into useful information for the business.
No problem, Ming. And I was actually thinking that we could run I'll run a technology session between anyone who's just purely interested, which can focus purely on the technology away from the specific business verticals. And if that's, I think a couple of the water guys indicated that as well. So perhaps we'll do that as an independent session that, again, we can just shoot out and people can jump on, and we can talk about the new R&D that's going on in terms of the Angular release and present more of that. We can talk about the vehicle tracking and the integration there and what have you. So let's do that, and then we can look at some of the other subjects that perhaps are business subjects similar to what Grant was presenting today that maybe other customers can take on.
Yep.
So I think what we'll do is we'll put it out there, and if people turn up, then people turn up, and then we can extend it out if people don't turn up. But an hour of people's time seems to be okay.
I think current arrangement of once a quarter is pretty good.
Yeah. Okay. So what we'll do is we're going to mix it with some of the other items. So maybe the water specific topics can be once a quarter, but we'll do other ones in between that people can jump on.
Yep.
Well, thank you, everyone. Who's left? Everyone's dropping off because they've all got 12 o'clocks. So thanks, Ming. And thank you, Lockie. Great, as always.
Not a problem at all. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you, Grant.
Thanks, Grant.
Thank you.
See you, Brad. See you,
Thank you.
Anthony. See you, guys.
Yeah.
Linda.